What if I told you there was a disease so fast and brutal that it could kill you in a matter of hours? The English sweating sickness was like something out of a horror movie. You'd wake up feeling fine, and by evening you could be dead. This thing terrorized England for decades. And here's the kicker. The cause remains unknown, though modern researchers think it might have been some kind of hantavirus. Scientists still can't figure out exactly what pathogen could work that fast. And that's only one of 5 plagues that were way worse than the Black Death. If you love weird history cold cases, hit like now. I mean, everyone thinks they know about history's worst pandemics, but you're about to find out how wrong most people are. Let's start with Rome's Golden Age disaster. You know how everyone thinks Rome just slowly declined over centuries? Yeah, that's not exactly what happened. There was this plague that hit right when Rome was at its peak, and it dealt a massive blow to the most powerful empire in history. I'm talking about the Antonine Plague, and this thing was brutal. It's 165 AD and Rome is absolutely crushing it. The empire stretches from Britain to the Middle East. Roman legions are unbeatable. Cities are booming, people are living better than they ever had before. Emperor Marcus Aurelius is running the show, and everything seems perfect. Then, boom, soldiers start dropping dead in their camps for no reason anyone can figure out. This wasn't some gradual decline like your history teacher probably told you. Healthy Roman soldiers were literally dying in their tents while their buddies watched in horror. These weren't sick people or weaklings, these were trained killers in peak physical condition getting taken out by something invisible. The disease specifically targeted adults in their prime: soldiers, craftsmen, farmers, basically everyone keeping the empire running. Rome had to start recruiting gladiators and slaves just to fill their army ranks, which historians see as evidence the military was seriously stressed. Galen was the most famous doctor in the Roman world, right? This guy was supposed to know everything about medicine, but when this plague hit, he was completely stumped. All he could do was write down the horrible symptoms he was seeing. People getting these massive black pustules all over their bodies. Fevers so high they were basically cooking from the inside. Galen's reports point towards smallpox, but we don't have genetic proof, so historians still debate the exact agent. The plague spread faster than Roman roads could carry news of it. That's saying something because Roman roads were the internet of the ancient world. But this disease was moving so quickly that cities would get hit before they even knew it was coming. Towns that had been thriving for centuries were turning into ghost towns in months. Places that had never seen real hardship were stacking corpses like firewood because they couldn't dig graves fast enough. Commercial activity collapsed. Urban life ground to a halt. The same empire that built the Colosseum and conquered Gaul was reduced to throwing bodies into mass graves. This outbreak likely killed millions. Estimates vary widely, but many scholars cite around 5 to 10 million deaths, roughly 10% of the empire's population. Now here's where historians get into heated debates. Did this single plague basically end Rome's golden age? Marcus Aurelius spent the rest of his reign trying to hold things together instead of expanding Roman power like he'd planned. Some historians argue the plague contributed to long-term instability that Rome never fully recovered from. Others dispute the scale of its long-term impact, saying Rome had bigger problems brewing. But here's the million-dollar question that still stumps historians today. What made the Antonine Plague target healthy adults instead of the weak? Most diseases go after easy targets. This one seemed to specifically hunt down the people Rome needed most. The results speak for themselves. The Roman Empire went from world domination to fighting for survival in just a few years. That's the thing about plagues, though. They don't follow rules. They don't care about your empire or your plans. And sometimes they work so fast that you barely have time to understand what's happening before it's too late. Speaking of diseases that worked impossibly fast, England had its own horror movie nightmare. Remember that opening about the disease that could kill you in hours? Yeah, we're talking about the English sweating sickness, and it was basically medieval England's worst nightmare. I mean, imagine living in a world where you could literally go to bed healthy and wake up dead. You wouldn't even make it to bed. Starting in 1485, this mystery disease would show up out of nowhere and kill people faster than anything doctors had ever seen. The major outbreaks hit in 1485, 1508, 1517, 1528, and 1551, appearing intermittently before vanishing completely after that final outbreak. We're talking about a time when most diseases took weeks or months to finish you off. This thing said forget that, started dropping people in hours. Doctors had no clue what they were dealing with. One minute someone's complaining about feeling a bit off, the next minute they're corpses. You could literally watch someone go from perfectly healthy to dead in a single day. The disease progressed extremely rapid, often within a day, sometimes just hours if you were really unlucky. John Caius, who witnessed the 1551 outbreak, wrote the main contemporary medical account describing the symptoms. You're having breakfast with your neighbor, chatting about whatever medieval people talked about, and by lunch that same neighbor is stone cold dead. Not from an accident or violence, just dead from some invisible killer that worked faster than anything anyone had seen. The symptoms were absolutely insane. People would get hit with these violent sweating fits that would soak through their clothes in minutes. Then they'd start shivering like they were freezing to death. Then they'd burn up again with fever so high they'd be delirious. It was like their bodies couldn't figure out if they were hot or cold, so they just decided to torture them with both at the same time. Here's what made this disease really terrifying, though. It didn't care if you were rich or poor. Most diseases back then had some kind of class system going on. Poor people living in filth would get sick while rich people in their fancy houses stayed healthy. Not this thing. It particularly targeted adults in their prime middle-aged people who should have been the healthiest. Kings, peasants, merchants, priests, everyone was fair game. The historical records show it didn't spare the elites, which was pretty rare for diseases back then. Entire towns would empty out in weeks as people either died or fled in terror. People would hear the sweating sickness was coming and just pack up and run. Can't really blame them when staying meant watching your family die in hours. The weirdest part, though, it would just disappear for years at a time, like completely vanish. People would start thinking maybe it was over, maybe they were safe. Then boom, it would come back stronger than before. This happened 5 different times between 1485 and 1551. Each time people thought they'd seen the last of it. Each time they were wrong. After 1551, it vanished completely and never came back, like it just decided it was done with England and moved on. No gradual decline, no final outbreak, just gone. Poof. See you later, England, it's been fun murdering your population. The cause remains unknown. Modern researchers have suggested an unknown hantavirus or other causes, but no genetic evidence has yet confirmed a definitive pathogen. They've tested old burial sites, analysed historical accounts, tried to match the symptoms to known diseases. Nothing. It's like this thing existed just to mess with people for 60 years and then disappeared into whatever dimension mystery diseases come from. What made this disease so fast it could kill in hours? Nobody knows for sure. All we know is that for 60 years, England lived in fear of something that could end your life before you finished your morning meal. But at least England's mystery eventually stopped killing people. In other parts of the world, scientists had to get way more creative to solve their plague puzzles. Mexico had one of history's biggest cold cases, and it took cutting-edge science to crack it. In 16th century Mexico, millions of indigenous people were dying from something called cocoletzli, and for centuries nobody knew what the hell it was. I mean, we're talking about one of history's biggest murder mysteries, except the killer was invisible, and the crime scene was an entire country. Between 1545 and 1548, estimates range from roughly 5 to 15 million dead in New Spain overall during mid-16th century waves, with some areas losing up to 80% of indigenous people. Think about that number for a second. That's like most of the population of Guatemala just disappearing in 3 years. The Spanish conquistadors had seen plenty of death and disease in their time, but this was something else entirely. The Spanish called it God's punishment, which is basically admitting they had no clue what was killing everyone. You know when you can't fix your computer so you just say it's cursed? Same energy. These guys had conquered entire civilizations, but they were completely stumped by a disease that didn't match anything they'd brought from Europe or seen in the New World. Just imagine 4 out of every 5 people in your town dying within a few years. Your neighbors, your friends, your family, basically everyone you know just gone. Entire communities that had existed for centuries were wiped off the map. Villages that had survived wars and famines got completely erased by this mystery killer. The massive indigenous mortality led to major labor shortages and food crises. Colonial authorities had to completely change tribute and labor systems because there literally weren't enough people left to work the land. Spanish doctors were struggling because this disease didn't match anything they'd seen in Europe. The symptoms were brutal too. High fevers, bleeding from the nose and mouth, severe headaches, black tongues, dark urine. Francisco Hernández de Toledo documented all these horrifying details, but nobody could figure out what was causing them. Colonial social disruption made everything worse. The Spanish had forced indigenous populations into concentrated settlements called reducciones, which probably helped the disease spread faster. For 500 years, historians argued about what caused the worst population collapse in American history. Some said it was typhus, others thought smallpox or measles. A few theories suggested it was something completely unknown. Scholars wrote entire careers' worth of papers trying to solve this mystery. Nobody could agree on anything except that millions of people had died from something nobody could identify. Then in 2018, scientists did something pretty wild. They started digging up old teeth from burial sites in Tepozcalula, Yucunda, Oaxaca. Now you might be thinking, why teeth? Turns out teeth are like little time capsules. They preserve DNA way better than other body parts. So these researchers started collecting teeth from people who died during the cocoletzli outbreaks. Science cracked a big piece of the case, and ancient DNA from teeth provided strong evidence that Salmonella paratyphi was present among victims, a discovery made public in 2018. This specific strain of Salmonella causes enteric fever, which matches up with many of the symptoms Spanish chroniclers described. The bleeding, the fevers, the rapid death. It started to explain all the hemorrhagic symptoms that were documented. The DNA evidence is solid, but viral hemorrhagic fever hypotheses remain part of the debate. So after 5 centuries of mystery, we've got strong evidence, but maybe not the complete picture. You know what's crazy though? All these historians and epidemiologists spent 500 years debating what killed these people, and a major piece of the answer was sitting in their mouths the whole time. Scientists just needed the technology to read what those teeth were trying to tell them. The really messed up part is that this particular strain of Salmonella probably came from Europe with the Spanish colonists. So the conquistadors brought the very disease that would end up killing more indigenous people than all their wars combined. But even that massive death toll doesn't compare to what happened when plague hit at the worst possible time in history. The Byzantine Empire was about to learn what happens when plague hits at the absolute worst moment. You think the Black Death was bad? The Justinianic plague hit 800 years earlier and may have contributed to ending the ancient world as people knew it. I mean, everyone gets all worked up about the plague that hit Europe in the 1300s, but this thing was doing serious damage when the Byzantine Empire was trying to reconquer the old Roman territories. Starting in 541 AD, this plague hit Emperor Justinian when he had big plans to rebuild the Roman Empire to its former glory. His armies were winning battles left and right, taking back Italy and the Western Mediterranean. Everything was going according to plan. Then this plague showed up and basically said, "Forget your dreams, buddy." Procopius, the Byzantine historian who witnessed it firsthand, claimed Constantinople was losing 10,000 people per day at its peak. John of Ephesus, another eyewitness, described the social chaos as bodies piled up and normal life collapsed. That's like a small city disappearing every 24 hours according to these sources. You know how crowded cities get during rush hour? Imagine that same crowd just gone the next morning, every single day. For months, Emperor Justinian himself caught it and barely survived, while his dreams of rebuilding Rome died with his people. The guy who was supposed to bring back the glory days of the empire was lying in bed fighting for his life. Meanwhile, his soldiers were dropping like flies and his grand conquest plans were falling apart. You can conquer all the territory you want, but it doesn't mean much if everyone's dead. Bodies were piling up so fast they had to resort to mass burials outside the city because they ran out of burial space. This wasn't some orderly funeral process with proper ceremonies. The smell must have been absolutely horrible. Constantinople went from being the jewel of the Byzantine Empire to a city struggling with constant death. The plague kept coming back in waves for about 200 years, making sure the empire could never fully recover. Just when people thought maybe it was over, boom, another outbreak. It was like the disease had a personal grudge against the Byzantines. Every time they tried to rebuild their armies or their economy, this plague would show up again and knock them back down. Modern DNA testing proved this was caused by Yersinia pestis, the same bacteria behind the Black Death. Scientists dug up old burial sites and found the exact same pathogen. But here's the twist: genetic studies show the Justinian strain wasn't a direct ancestor of the Black Death strain. Multiple plague lineages were apparently floating around Eurasia, which means this disease was way more widespread than anyone realized. Some older historical accounts and interpretations suggest tens of millions died over the pandemic's 2-century recurrence, but recent intertibetary work challenges that scale. Modern historians debate the true impact, with some arguing for massive demographic collapse while others point to archaeological evidence suggesting more limited regional effects. What everyone agrees on is that this plague hit the Byzantine Empire hard at exactly the wrong time. The Justinianic plague may have contributed to the empire's long-term struggles and helped usher in major changes across the Mediterranean world. Think about what happened when this disease disrupted the last major attempt to restore Roman glory. The Byzantine Empire never fully bounced back from this hit. What could have been a restored Roman Empire turned into fragmented kingdoms trying to survive. But all these regional plagues, no matter how devastating, were nothing compared to what happened when disease finally learned to travel the entire planet at once. The third pandemic started in China's Yunnan province in the 1850s and became the first plague to truly go global thanks to steamships and railways. You know how diseases used to be limited by how fast people could walk or ride horses? Yeah, those days were over. Now you had these massive steam-powered ships carrying infected rats and fleas to every port in the world. Railways were moving people and cargo faster than ever before. It was like building highways for disease. This wasn't just hitting one region like the other plagues we've talked about. This thing was simultaneously killing people in Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, and the Americas. Picture a world map and just start putting death markers everywhere. That's what this looked like. While people in China were dying, the same plague was also killing folks in San Francisco, and Mumbai, and Sydney, all at the same time. Unlike previous plagues that burned out quickly, this one kept spreading and killing for over 100 years. Most diseases run their course and disappear. This plague basically moved in and decided to stay. It would hit a city, kill a bunch of people, then hop on the next ship to somewhere else. Meanwhile, it's still killing people back where it started. It was like playing the world's deadliest game of tag. Scientists estimate around 12 million deaths, concentrated in India and China, but with outbreaks on multiple continents. That's not just a pandemic, that's a global death machine that refused to shut down. The plague hit major ports like Hong Kong, San Francisco, and Mumbai, basically following global trade routes. It was like the disease had studied a map of international commerce and said, "Perfect, this is my travel plan." Hong Kong was one of the worst hit cities, with repeated outbreaks that kept coming back. San Francisco dealt with multiple waves of infection that authorities tried to cover up. Mumbai became a major hub for spreading the plague throughout the British Empire. What made it worse was that by this time, people thought they understood disease better, but they were still mostly helpless. This was the modern era, right? People had microscopes and scientific methods. They understood germs existed. But knowing germs cause disease and actually stopping a global pandemic are two completely different things. All that medical knowledge meant basically nothing when rats were carrying infected fleas onto every ship in the world. The plague moved with global trade like it had figured out the fastest way to kill the most people. Every cargo ship, every passenger liner, every train carrying goods, they were all potential plague carriers. The more connected the world became, the faster this disease could spread. It was like humanity built the perfect delivery system for its own destruction. By the early 20th century, bacteriology identified Yersinia pestis as the cause, and public health measures started reducing outbreaks. Scientists finally figured out what they were dealing with and how to fight it. Better sanitation, rat control, and quarantine procedures slowly started working. It took until the 1950s for this plague to finally be considered over, but at least modern science eventually got the upper hand. This was the first plague to prove that in a connected world, nowhere is safe. The same innovations that were supposed to improve life became the highways for death. But you know what's really messed up about all this plague history? The Black Death gets all the attention because it hit Europe when people were starting to write everything down, but these other plagues rivaled or exceeded it in different ways, some in lethality in certain places, some in duration, and some in long-term social effects. I mean, the Justinianic plague lasted for centuries. The third pandemic went global and killed for over 100 years straight. Ancient DNA and climate and social research show that disease often changed history in ways more dramatic than the Black Death, and we're still learning the details. The next time someone talks about history's worst pandemic, you can blow their mind with these forgotten killers. History's worst killers don't always get the best PR.